Selgor the Unyielding was a name that demanded respect across the galaxy. A stern instructor with a passion for perfection, he was known for his unbending adherence to rules, his razor-sharp intellect, and his utter intolerance for inefficiency. For decades, Selgor had taught at the most prestigious academies of the Galactic Council, where only the most disciplined minds could prosper under his exacting standards. He had molded countless promising beings into distinguished leaders, engineers, and strategists, each one shaped by the rigorous learning methods he championed. His figure was imposing, his demeanor cold. Standing at over 7 feet tall, with dark, polished scales that shimmered in a bluish-black hue, he exuded a presence that was both intimidating and formidable. His eyes, deep-set and brilliant orange, gave the impression that they could pierce through even the thickest mental defenses. To be taught by Selgor was to be put under relentless pressure, something that made beings across the stars either dread or desperately strive for a chance to learn from him. So, when the Galactic Council approached Selgor with an assignment, it was no surprise that it was an assignment of unique importance. The Council had been collecting data on a newly discovered civilization and insignificant species that called themselves humans. These humans were curious creatures, displaying incredible adaptability and resilience, and yet many aspects of their behavior seemed highly illogical to the Council's brightest minds. Their insistence on play as a central part of their culture was particularly puzzling. Why would an intelligent species spend so much time and energy on activities that seemed devoid of practical value? The Council had tasked Selgor with conducting direct research into this very question. It was an assignment that would require him to immerse himself in the life of a young human child to understand how and why play contributed to their development. Selgor had been less than pleased. Such a trivial task was surely beneath him. But the Council was insistent his brilliance, they argued, made him uniquely suited to derive insight from such a peculiar assignment. Reluctantly, Selgor agreed. He had landed on Earth, disguised in a synthetic human form. His scales were hidden beneath simulated human skin, his height reduced to something less intimidating, and his alien eyes masked behind an innocuous shade of brown. As he emerged from his craft, carefully concealed in a wooded area outside of a small suburban town, Selgor felt an unfamiliar discomfort. He was no stranger to new environments, but this was unlike anything he had experienced. The air was thick with moisture, the sounds of strange creatures filled his ears, and the scent of vegetation was almost overwhelming. The chaos of Earth was far removed from the orderly environments of the academies where he had spent most of his time. Selgor was given a cover identity, a temporary tutor sent to help a young child named Emma. She was a 6-year-old human girl, living with her family in a cozy house on a quiet street. The Council had arranged for him to integrate into her life with minimal disruption. His orders were clear: observe, participate if necessary, and document how play affected her development. His arrival at Emma's house was met with the typical warmth of human hospitality, something that baffled him. Emma's mother, a cheerful woman named Linda, welcomed him with a wide smile and an eagerness to accommodate his every need. She spoke with enthusiasm about Emma's love for learning, her energy, and her excitement about having a tutor. Linda's enthusiasm, however, was not reciprocated by Selgor. He gave curt, polite responses, his focus entirely on his mission, and his demeanor remained as cold and aloof as ever. He had no interest in these pleasantries, nor in the unnecessary emotional displays of this human woman. The real challenge, however, began when Selgor first met Emma. She was a small, bright-eyed child with curly hair that bounced as she ran around the room. Her excitement at meeting her new tutor was palpable. She bounced on her toes, her eyes wide with curiosity, and immediately began bombarding him with questions. "Are you going to teach me math? Or science? Can you help me with my reading?" Emma asked, her words running together in her excitement. Selgor merely blinked at her, struggling to maintain his human disguise under the barrage of her enthusiasm. He had been prepared for many things, but the sheer energy of this child caught him off guard. Emma didn't seem to notice his discomfort. Instead, she grabbed his hand and pulled him towards a small table covered in crayons, paper, and a haphazard stack of books. "Look, I drew this yesterday," she announced proudly, shoving a piece of paper in his face. It was a crude drawing of a castle, with colorful stick figures standing beside it. "This is me, and this is the castle I built for my dolls. Do you want to play with me?" Play. The word grated on Selgor's ears. He was here to observe and understand, not to participate in such frivolous activities. But the council had made it clear he was to immerse himself in her world. He hesitated for a moment, then reluctantly nodded. Emma let out a joyful squeal and immediately began gathering her toys. Selgor watched, baffled, as she created an entire scenario. There were princesses, knights, a dragon represented by a stuffed toy that had seen better days, and a grand quest. The narrative was chaotic, with no clear goal, no rules, and seemingly no logic. Selgor tried to follow along, his expression growing increasingly perplexed. "How does this teach her anything?" he thought to himself. "What is the purpose of this disorganized mess?" Emma, however, was completely in her element. She assigned roles to each of her dolls, and even gave Selgor a knight figure, insisting he be part of the quest. Selgor awkwardly held the plastic figure, unsure what to do with it. Emma laughed at his confusion, her joy infectious. "Just make him talk," she said. "He has to save the princess." "Why must he save the princess?" Selgor asked, his voice monotone. "Because she's in trouble," Emma responded, as though it was the most obvious thing in the world. Selgor frowned. The logic was still lost on him, but he played along, making the knight figure move stiffly across the table. Emma giggled, her laughter filling the room, and Selgor felt something shift within him, something unfamiliar. He couldn't place it, but there was a strange warmth in Emma's laughter that seemed to fill the room. The following days were no easier for Selgor. Every day, Emma insisted they play some new game. Sometimes they built structures out of colorful blocks. Other times they played pretend, with Emma assigning Selgor roles that ranged from a pirate to a chef. She introduced him to games like hide and seek, tag, and countless other activities that seemed to have no discernible purpose. Selgor found himself running through the backyard, hiding behind bushes and crawling under tables, all in the name of play. It was exhausting. Selgor's mind, accustomed to structured learning and logical problem-solving, struggled to understand how any of this contributed to human development. But there was something about Emma, her boundless enthusiasm, her ability to find joy in the smallest things, that intrigued him. Despite his initial resistance, he found himself wanting to understand her world. One day, Emma introduced him to a game she called Castle Builders. She brought out a large box of building blocks and challenged Selgor to help her build the biggest castle they could. Selgor, who was used to constructing detailed models and simulations, initially dismissed the game as childish nonsense. But as he watched Emma work, he noticed something remarkable. She approached the task with an extraordinary level of focus, carefully selecting each block, balancing them with precision, and constantly adapting her design when things didn't go as planned. Emma's castle was far from perfect. Blocks would fall, towers would collapse, and yet, she never seemed discouraged. She would simply pick up the fallen pieces and try again, each time making subtle adjustments to improve the structure. Selgor observed this with a growing sense of curiosity. He had always taught his students that perfection was the only acceptable outcome, that mistakes were to be avoided at all costs. And yet here was Emma, embracing her mistakes, learning from them, and enjoying the process without fear of failure. For the first time, Selgor found himself questioning his own methods. Could it be that there was value in this chaotic, imperfect process? Could it be that learning was not always about achieving perfection, but about the journey itself? Emma's resilience was something Selgor had not anticipated. She would often fall while running, scrape her knees, or knock over her own creations. But each time she would get up, dust herself off, and continue as if nothing had happened. One afternoon, after a particularly energetic game of tag, Emma tripped and fell, scraping her knee. Selgor rushed over, unsure of what to do. He expected her to cry, to be upset, perhaps even to abandon the game. Instead, Emma looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears, and smiled. "It's okay," she said, her voice a little shaky. "I can keep playing." Sulgor was stunned. In his world, injuries were a sign of failure, something to be avoided at all costs. But Emma's attitude was different. She saw her fall not as a failure, but as a part of the experience. She wiped her tears, stood up, and immediately resumed the game, her laughter echoing through the yard. Sulgor watched her, his mind racing. He had always believed that the only way to succeed was through discipline, through structure, through the elimination of all imperfections. But here was this small human child, teaching him something entirely different, that true strength lay not in avoiding failure, but in embracing it, learning from it, and continuing to move forward. As the days turned into weeks, Sulgor found himself changing. He was no longer merely observing Emma, he was participating in her world. He played along with her games, built castles with her, and even laughed at her jokes. He found himself enjoying these moments, something he had never thought possible. There was a warmth in Emma's world that was absent from the cold, rigid environments he was used to. And though he still didn't fully understand the concept of play, he began to see its value not just for Emma, but for himself as well. By the end of the first month, Sulgor had come to a realization. The Galactic Council had sent him to Earth to learn about the human concept of play, believing it to be a trivial aspect of their development. But Sulgor now understood that play was far from trivial. It was a powerful tool for learning, for growth, and for building resilience. It allowed humans to explore, to make mistakes, and to find joy in the process of learning, something that Sulgor had never allowed himself to do. Emma had taught Sulgor more in those few weeks than he had learned in his entire career as an instructor. And the most remarkable thing of all was that she had done it without even trying. The weeks turned into months, and Sulgor the Unyielding found himself increasingly at ease in his role as Emma's tutor, though that role was now far different from what he had originally envisioned. His initial mission was to observe and understand the strange human concept of play, but slowly and almost imperceptibly, the mission had evolved into something else entirely. He was no longer just observing, he was participating, and through that participation, he began to transform. He became part of Emma's world, a place of wonder, laughter, and spontaneity that contrasted sharply with the cold, disciplined environments he had known all his life. One autumn afternoon, as the sun cast long, golden shadows across the backyard, Emma decided they were going to build a fortress. Sulgor was now familiar with Emma's penchant for building things. He had found himself assembling castles, spaceships, and even an elaborate structure that Emma insisted was a time machine. Today was no different. Emma pulled out her ever-growing collection of building blocks, a mix of colorful plastic shapes, mismatched Lego pieces, and even a few items she had scavenged from around the house: paper towel rolls, empty boxes, and plastic cups. Sulgor noted how resourceful she was, how she could find potential in what others might see as junk. They began building in the middle of the yard, surrounded by leaves that had turned brilliant shades of red and orange. Emma handed Sulgor a large cardboard box, telling him it would be the main gate of the fortress. She then gave herself the role of fortress commander, issuing instructions with the gravity of a seasoned leader. Sulgor, to his own surprise, found that he did not mind taking orders from this small human. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and he appreciated the way she approached the task, serious, yet filled with laughter. They worked side by side, Emma chatting endlessly about her plans for the fortress. Sulgor listened intently, nodding and occasionally offering a suggestion of his own. She wanted the fortress to be a place where everyone could be safe, a concept that intrigued Sulgor. Safety was something he understood, but the way Emma spoke about it, it wasn't just physical safety. She spoke of a place where no one had to feel lonely or afraid. Sulgor realized that her concept of safety extended to emotions and nuance that was new to him. As the fortress began to take shape, a gentle breeze swept through the yard, causing one of the towers to collapse. Emma sighed, her face briefly clouding with frustration. Selgor expected her to grow upset, perhaps to abandon the project altogether. Instead, she simply began to rebuild, and he found himself helping her, this time with greater care. Together, they reinforced the structure, adding extra blocks to strengthen it. Emma's resilience, her unwillingness to let setbacks discourage her, was something that Selgor had come to admire deeply. It reminded him of the qualities he had once tried to instill in his own students, but here, there was a warmth, a joy in the process that his former methods had always lacked. Over time, Selgor's understanding of play began to evolve. He came to see it not as a distraction or a meaningless activity, but as a powerful tool for exploration and learning. Through play, Emma was developing skills that went beyond the physical. She was learning to think creatively, to solve problems, and, most importantly, to connect with others. Selgor began to reflect on his own methods as an instructor. He had always emphasized structure, discipline, and the avoidance of mistakes. But watching Emma, he realized that mistakes were not something to fear, they were an essential part of the learning process. One day, Emma introduced him to a new game. She called it The Great Adventure, and it involved exploring the faraway lands of her backyard. She handed Selgor a makeshift map, a piece of paper with crayon drawings that vaguely resembled the layout of the yard. She pointed out the different kingdoms they would visit: the Flower Garden Kingdom, the Forest of Shadows, a small clump of bushes near the fence, and the Dragon's Den, the area under the porch. Each place had its own challenges and treasures, and it was their mission to complete the journey together. Selgor was skeptical at first. The idea of exploring a familiar backyard as if it were uncharted territory seemed absurd. But Emma was insistent, and he found himself drawn into her world once again. They set off, Emma leading the way with her map in hand and Selgor following closely behind. Their journey through the Flower Garden Kingdom involved collecting magical petals, fallen leaves that would help them defeat the dragon. Emma explained that they needed exactly 10 petals to succeed. She counted each one aloud as they found them, her excitement growing with each new discovery. Selgor, observing her, noted how she turned a simple counting exercise into an adventure, how she found joy in the small task of gathering leaves. He realized that through play, Emma was learning not just numbers but also patience, teamwork, and the ability to find wonder in the mundane. Next, they approached the Forest of Shadows. Emma declared that it was filled with hidden dangers and that they needed to move quietly to avoid waking the sleeping beasts. She tiptoed through the bushes, her eyes wide with exaggerated caution. Selgor mimicked her movements, his large frame moving with surprising grace. He found himself genuinely invested in the game, his senses heightened as if there were indeed some unseen danger lurking nearby. They moved slowly, carefully, until they reached the edge of the forest, where Emma let out a sigh of relief. "We made it," she whispered, her eyes shining with excitement. Selgor nodded, a sense of accomplishment washing over him. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time, a feeling of triumph, not because of achieving some grand objective, but because of the journey itself. Finally, they arrived at the Dragon's Den. Emma crouched down, peering into the shadowy space beneath the porch. She turned to Selgor, her expression serious. "We have to be brave," she said. "The dragon is very powerful, but we have the magical petals." Selgor nodded, and together they crawled under the porch, Emma leading the way with her magical petals clutched tightly in her hand. She whispered instructions to Selgor, explaining how they would use the petals to defeat the dragon. They moved slowly, deliberately, until Emma suddenly let out a triumphant shout. "We did it. We defeated the dragon." She raised her hand, holding the petals high, her face beaming with joy. Selgor looked at her, a smile spreading across his own face. He found himself cheering alongside her, the sense of victory filling him with an unexpected warmth. After their adventure, they sat on the porch steps, catching their breath. Emma leaned against Selgor, her small frame resting comfortably against his. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with curiosity. "Do you ever play where you come from?" she asked. Selgor hesitated, unsure how to answer. Play was not something that existed in his world, not in the way Emma understood it. His people valued discipline, structure, and efficiency. Play was seen as a distraction, a waste of time. But now, sitting here with Emma, Selgor began to question that belief. "No," he finally said. "We do not play." Emma frowned, her brows furrowing in thought. "That's sad," she said simply. "Play is important. It makes us happy. Happy." The word lingered in Selgor's mind. It was such a simple concept, yet one that had always eluded him. He had spent his life striving for perfection, for excellence, for achievement. But happiness? That was something he had never pursued, something he had never even considered important. And yet, here was Emma, a small human child, telling him that play, this seemingly frivolous activity, was the key to happiness. As the days passed, Selgor found himself reflecting more and more on Emma's words. He began to incorporate play into their daily routines, not because it was part of his mission, but because he genuinely enjoyed it. They would spend hours building, exploring, and imagining together. He found himself laughing more, his once cold demeanor softening in the presence of this joyful child. He began to see the world through her eyes, a world filled with wonder, excitement, and endless possibilities. One day, Selgor decided to introduce Emma to something from his own culture. He had brought with him a small holographic projector, a device used by his people for training simulations. He thought it might be interesting to see how Emma would react to it. He set up the projector in the backyard, and with a few adjustments, it created a shimmering, three-dimensional image of a landscape from his home planet, a vast desert with towering rock formations and a sky filled with two suns. Emma's eyes widened in awe as she looked at the projection. "Wow," she whispered. "It's beautiful." Selgor nodded, a sense of pride swelling within him. "It is my home," he said. Emma reached out, her hand passing through the holographic image. "Can we explore it?" she asked, her eyes filled with excitement. Selgor hesitated. The landscape was not designed for play. It was a harsh, unforgiving environment, meant to test the endurance and strength of his people. But as he looked at Emma, her face filled with wonder, he found himself nodding. "Yes," he said. "We can explore it." They stepped into the projection, the holographic landscape surrounding them. Emma ran ahead, her laughter echoing through the simulated desert. Selgor followed, a smile on his face. They climbed the towering rocks, ran through the sand, and watched as the twin suns set on the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. As they sat together, watching the sunset, Emma turned to Selgor. "Thank you for showing me this," she said. "It's amazing." Selgor looked at her, his heart filled with a warmth he had never known. "Thank you, Emma," he said, "for teaching me to play." Emma smiled, her eyes shining with happiness. "Anytime," she said. As the sun set on the holographic landscape, Selgor realized that his mission was complete, but not in the way he had expected. He had come to Earth to learn about the human concept of play, but he had learned so much more. He had learned about resilience, joy, creativity, and the importance of finding happiness in the journey, not just the destination. And most importantly, he had learned that play was not a distraction or a waste of time. It was a powerful tool for connection, growth, and understanding. Selgor knew that when he returned to his people, he would no longer be the same stern, unyielding instructor he had once been. He would bring with him the lessons he had learned from Emma, and perhaps, in time, he could help his people understand the value of play as well. He had come to Earth as a teacher, but it was Emma who had taught him the most important lesson of all that in play. There is not only learning but also love, connection, and the simple joy of being alive. And as the projection faded, leaving them sitting in the warm glow of the setting sun, Selgor felt, for the first time in his life, truly happy.